Chivalry 2 is a game of mass player versus player medieval combat. However, ironically, there is not an ounce of chivalry in sight, unless of course you count throwing napalm over your adversary and setting him on fire, or indeed lopping off his arms and legs whilst he's unarmed, chivalrous. However, apart from maybe a slightly misleading title, the game is otherwise exactly what you'd expect. The question is though, is it worth playing? Well, the answer is a hesitant maybe if you're into these sort of things, if player versus player combat is your bag. For casuals like me who like to jump in occasionally, maybe not so much. I'll tell you all about it anyway. And if you like my simple style of no-nonsense reviews, like, subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss any of my future videos. Now, there's no story at all to Chivalry 2, it is purely an online player versus player medieval combat game. So I'll explain a few of the game mechanics here where I would normally tell you about a game's story. You'll usually play in one of two teams, red or blue, in up to 64 player battles, or you can go into the free-for-all mode where you just hack away at anything and anyone that moves. There are various maps and battles available where you might be attacking a castle that the other one's defending, meeting in an open battlefield, maybe escorting a caravan of goods, or trying to kill an important enemy leader. But the idea is pretty much the same. Hack away at the enemy team until they're all dead. Speaking of objectives, make sure to check at the top of the screen to see what your objective actually is, because on some maps it might just be to kill as many of the enemy as possible, but on others you have to advance the objective and you only have a certain amount of time to do this. It might be pushing your battering ram up to the castle gates, or actually breaking down the gates, or if you're defending the town square for a certain amount of time. So make sure you watch what the actual objective is and not just run around killing stuff, because there's lots of teams that do actually lose games because the players are just intent on zerging and fighting in the middle. Yeah, there's a hark back to Alterac Valley in World of Warcraft, rather than actually pushing the objectives. There are 4 classes available to play: an archer, a knight, a footman and a vanguard, and each of those have 3 subclasses that allow a bit of variation of weaponry and armour and fighting style. Each class of course carries 2 weapons into combat. In the case of an archer it's a bow or a crossbow plus a melee weapon, and then the others get 2-handed weapons or a single melee weapon and shield. And everything can be thrown. Yes, you can throw your axe or mace at somebody if you want to. Good way of cutting down runners. And of course you can pick up other weapons lying across the battlefield. There's also some ranged fire pots you can throw at people, that's the napalm I mentioned earlier. And each class also gets a triggerable special ability that builds up through fighting. The combat controls are actually pretty quick to learn, but do take a lot of time and effort to master to get really good at the game, with the blocking and the dodging and the swings and the ripostes and the counter-attacks and all that. Now, as you can see from the video, the graphics look pretty damn good. They're crisp and clear and detailed, and the motion is good. All in all, I was very impressed by how this looks and plays, and also performance-wise, I had no issues getting 60 FPS, which is what I use for recording on my system. My specs are down below in the description if you want to have a look. There was a couple of funny camera issues when the game first released, some shaky things, and sometimes your legs wouldn't animate as you were running, so it looked like you were moving very oddly across the battlefield. I think that looks a lot better now after a couple of patches, but there might still be some issues with that. There's also, very important to note, an option between first person and third person camera modes. Most of my footage here you'll probably see is in third person because it just allows you to see what's going on around you in the melee, see where enemies are coming from, see where your friends are, and see what's going on. Whereas first person cuts a lot of that out, makes it a lot harder. I think the game would be better if some of the servers that you can play on have rules maybe first person only for people who want to play in first person mode, so they're not fighting at a big disadvantage against people who want to use the third person camera. The sound for this is also very good. It's got some pretty good voices in there. I think the tutorial guys was maybe a little bit overdone with some forced shouting, which tended to show towards the end of the tutorial. But when you're actually playing the game and going through everything, the bangs, the clanks, the knocks, the thuds, the horrific groans of people being sliced up, yeah, it's all pretty damn good, and again, very impressive. Okay then, let's talk about my likes and dislikes, and as always we'll start with the good stuff. And the first one is obvious. It's the graphics, and the sound I suppose, but the graphics especially, because I think the game looks absolutely gorgeous, as well as occasionally looking absolutely brutal when people's legs and arms and heads get chopped off. It all flows and performs really nicely, and I love the look of the medieval world in which we're fighting, all down to the detail on the trebuchets and the catapults and the battering rams, and the detail on the weapons and armour and the animation and all this. I think it looks really, really nice. The fact that you can customise your characters is in most ways very good and adds to a little bit of variety in the game. Now, I say in most ways, we're going to talk about something about that in the dislikes, but we'll leave that for a moment. But overall, I think the game looks fantastic. I also like the controls, because I was expecting something very difficult to learn on this. I was very pleasantly surprised to learn, however, that the controls are very quick to pick up, and the tutorial is actually very good and to the point on teaching you how to fight and how to block and riposte and all the rest. And it's a lot simpler than I imagined it would be. Which leads me on to my third point. The game is very quick to learn. I thought I'd have to go through hours and hours of grueling practice just to be able to maybe hit someone or block an attack from the right direction or counterattack. But it really isn't the case. You can get into this very fast. Now, I should point out at this point that whilst it is quick to learn and you can get up and running very quickly, it will take a long time to master, so don't think that you are going to be a blade master in just half an hour of playing. And all respect to the most skilled players in this game, they have definitely put the time in to get there. And I also like the different game modes available, because it adds a lot of variety to a game with otherwise not a huge amount of variety, because let's face it, it is just about hacking people up in as many different ways as you can think of. So there's a couple of different modes. There's 40-player matches and 64-player matches. There's also a free-for-all where it's not in teams, you can just hack anyone to bits. That's kind of interesting and allows you to take lots of people unawares. That's one of the best tactics in a lot of the combat, by the way, is look for a target who is busy tunnel visioned and focused on someone else, and just go up behind them and hack them to pieces or attack them from the side where they're not looking. At least maybe that's what I did to compensate for a lack of skill. But it's nice to have some different game modes, and the different maps and battles that they throws at you are very good as well, because you're not just constantly trying to attack the same castle or fight an open zerging battlefield where both sides just rush into the middle. There's a little bit of variety in the fact that you have to watch what the objectives are sometimes and push for them. It just adds a bit more interest into the game. Oh, and while I'm on the topic of variety, I just want to say about the classes available in the game. The 3 melee classes do have a few differences between them, especially visually, but they tend to feel like they play pretty similar, depending on the weapons that you assign them. The archer class, however, everybody seems to want to play the archer, and I've only got to try it out once briefly, because every time I go to try and get some footage of playing as an archer, I join a battle where everyone on my team has already chosen to be an archer and it's been locked out. No one can select it because there is the maximum limit. Now, in a sense, it's a good way that there are limits for that ranged class, so the game doesn't get out of balance or become ridiculous. But I just wanted to point that out now. If you're thinking, oh yeah, archer, I'm going to love playing as that, I'm not interested in melee, then be aware that everybody else thinks the same, and in most of the games you play, you probably won't get to play that class. It doesn't seem to be any issues like that with the other classes, however. Okay, on to some of the things that I didn't like very much about Chivalry 2, and this first point was particularly annoying. In a game where half the player base is going to be running around covered in blood from the gory combat, why did the developers choose to go with a blue team and a red team? I mean, why red? Because when you are absolutely covered in blood, it is very hard to tell which side you are on. You see a player coming running towards you, they look red-ish, but they're smeared in gore. You think, is that one of my team running back to me? Do I help him? Or is it someone on the red team? Should I be chopping their head off? And it's just baffling why they went with this instead of, say, green and yellow or blue and yellow, or just any other colour would have been good. There's also, apparently, a customization option where you can remove the tabard from your class that you're playing, which means you don't have that beautiful red or blue overall thing flowing over you. And that makes it exceptionally hard to tell what team you're on if you're also covered in blood. You can maybe use that to your advantage, but you might also get hacked away at a bit by your own team as well. We'll come on to team damage in a minute. But the developers could have picked some other colours. There is a setting you can turn on which toggles a little indicator above a player to say whether they're an ally or not. It's a small indicator. I played with it, and it's very easy to miss when you're in a mass crowded melee or fighting in an intense street brawl. Now, maybe this next point was also the same in the first Chivalry game, which I know was very well received. But this was also the case in Mordau. If you played that, it's a very similar game to these. And that is one of the main techniques for doing damage, is to get a great big two-handed weapon or a huge long halberd or something. And as you swing it towards the enemy, you rapidly spin the mouse and your character will do nearly a 180 spin with this huge great big weapon, and it will slice through anything in their way as if they're not actually there and do huge area of effect damage. I don't particularly like this tactic. Yes, it is something that I can learn and is something that I have done when playing. It is part of the game, so it's not that I object to it, it's just that I personally don't enjoy it so much, as I feel like it takes away a lot of the individual skill element of fighting in a medieval battle or a one-on-one fight. Well, actually, it doesn't really matter in a one-on-one fight. It's there for when you want to take on loads of people. The trouble is, this also inflicts a load of team damage, which we're going to get onto right now. Now, team damage is there in the game. I dare say it can be turned off, and the degree of it can be turned up on private servers. But in the standard gameplay, it doesn't do a huge amount of damage. It can be enough sometimes to finish you off if you're on a little bit of health. But it ties back in with this earlier tactic of doing huge swings around with these massive weapons and the style of combat that you get in the game, because nearly all the fights, they're not going to be one-on-one out on the castle ramparts or out in an open battlefield. It's going to be lots of players packed into a tight space, and when you swing that big weapon, you will almost always hit some of your teammates, unless you're the only one there surrounded by 5 or 6 enemies, in which case that is perfect. But of course, this is the internet. It is not full of considerate players. Everyone piles in on the easiest target or the choke point and swings away with the big two-handed swords and great big battle axes. But this particular tactic of this super fast spin, slice through everything as if they're not there, inflict AoE damage, combined with the inevitable team damage from mass crowded combat that goes on, is something that kind of annoys me. Now, there's other games where if you try to swing the sword, if you don't have the space to fully get a swing because it's a big weapon, it won't swing properly or it'll bounce off. And that's when the little short stabbing or thrusting weapons are more appropriate to use. And in those sort of games, well, it makes more sense. You've got a choice of weapons for the type of encounter that you are going into. But here, they just run in with a great big bardiche or a two-handed sword or a halberd and swing away at everyone, and who cares if they're on your side? You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, right? So if a few of your team get a little bit sliced up in the process, no one's going to notice. In fact, you can always say that they were covered in blood and you couldn't tell if they're on your team or not. Something else that personally annoyed me, but doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of the game, is that there's automatic team switching built into it, which means that if some players leave one team and the numbers are out of balance, there's a chance you'll be switched onto that other team to make it up. Now, generally, that sort of thing in player versus player matches is good and often essential, because when one team starts to lose, they tend to skip out and go and find another match. Not that losing makes a huge difference to your score in this. It's more dependent on your personal performance in the fighting and pushing for objectives. But it is incredibly annoying when you have actually actively tried to help your team push the objectives by maybe trying to capture the castle gates or defend the castle square, and you've done a great job and your team gets ahead, and suddenly you're auto switched onto the other side because people have left because they don't want to be on the losing team. It doesn't really matter to the scores, as I said, but it is kind of annoying when you feel like you were making the effort to win and be part of the team and play as a team, and you switched out onto the other side. I didn't enjoy that bit. And one final thing, that it's not that I dislike it, it's just that I distrust it. There is a cash shop in the game. Now, at the moment, you can just buy premium currency, which you can then spend to unlock customizable cosmetics for your characters. Now, this isn't a problem, and the developers have said that it is there for people who just want to support the work of the developers so they can carry on adding to this wonderful game in the future. Their words, not mine. However, every time there's a cash shop, I'm always a little bit wary because a lot of the time they wait for the reviews to come out and people to feature the game on stream and stuff, and then a few months down the road they add all these extra features in that the reviewers didn't cover. Things like you can buy XP boosters or fast levelers or whatever else, or a big premium sword which does more damage or something. Maybe they won't. They probably won't add anything like that. But the fact there's a cash shop there always makes me a little wary. You don't have to spend real money to unlock things in the game. You just need to play it lots and you'll earn the points to unlock all the customizable stuff in there. At the moment, maybe they'll put something that's just cash shop only in the game in the future. I don't know. But that's, you see where I'm thinking with this? I just don't know. There's that distrust of games developers because of what other developers have done in the past. So in conclusion, is Chivalry 2 worth playing? Well, it depends on the type of gamer you are. If this is your sort of thing, if you like online player versus player, or intend to just sit down for a couple of weeks and play this non-stop, you will really enjoy it. I had a lot of fun in it. I did. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. However, I thought I might like to come back to it occasionally as a break from other games. And the problem with that is that if you've come back to this after a short break, it can take you a little while to get used to the controls and the moves and the timing of everything again. So as a casual player, I don't think I'd enjoy this as much, and therefore for me it's a 6.5 or 7 out of 10. But if you like the look of this, if it's your sort of game and you tend to play it a lot, it is good at what it does and you should have a whole lot of fun with it.